The first thing I noticed wasn't the sirens. It was that my phone buzzed with a number I'd deleted 3 years ago. Diane, my ex-wife. A woman I hadn't spoken to since the divorce papers were signed, in a county office that smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax, in a building with fluorescent lights that hummed like they were trying to tell me something. I'd watched her sign her name in that room, and I'd thought, that's the last time I'll ever see that handwriting. And now her name was lit up on my screen. And the text under it said only 6 words. I know the shelter code. Run. I was standing in my kitchen in Cedar Hollow, Pennsylvania, holding a glass of water I never finished. It was 2:14 in the afternoon. Sunlight was coming through the window over the sink at the slow, lazy angle of early autumn, falling across the counter and the half-read newspaper and the coffee mug I hadn't washed. The radio on the windowsill had been murmuring something about a containment event near Pittsburgh, the kind of phrasing newscasters use when they don't yet know how scared they're allowed to sound. I'd been only half listening, the way you half listen to weather you don't think will reach you. Then her name lit up my screen, and the bottom of my stomach dropped out, because Diane never reached out. Not on my birthday. Not when my father died. And she would have had every reason to send 2 cold lines of sympathy, not once in 3 years. And now she was telling me to run. I texted back, my thumb clumsy on the glass. What shelter? What code? The reply came fast, too fast, like she'd already written it and was holding it ready. The Mercer Ridge fallout shelter, the one your dad helped build. The code still works. We have maybe 6 hours before the roads close and the first wave hits Cedar Hollow. I'll explain everything. Just meet me. I set the glass down very carefully on the counter, the way you do when your hands have started to shake and you don't want to admit it yet. When you don't want the small betrayal of rattling glass, to make the fear real before you're ready. I want to take a second before I go on. Thank you to everyone who keeps coming back to these stories. And if this is your first time here, welcome. If grounded survival stories are the kind of thing that keep you up at night in a good way, stay with the channel, leave a comment, and let me know you're listening. It honestly helps more than you know. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened over the next 6 hours, because I've replayed it 1,000 times, in the dark, in the quiet, and I still don't know if I made the right choices. My name is Russell Crane. I'm 51 years old, and for most of my life I worked as a maintenance and systems technician for the county water treatment, backup generators, the unglamorous bones of a small town that nobody thinks about until the lights go out and the taps run dry. I know infrastructure the way some men know scripture. I know what it sounds like when a pump is about to fail. That faint rising whine under the normal hum. And I know what it smells like when a transformer is cooking itself to death. That sharp ozone and varnish stink that gets into the back of your throat. That knowledge is the only reason I'm alive to tell you this. And it's also the reason I understood, faster than most people would have, exactly how bad things were about to get. Because here's what nobody on the radio was saying out loud yet. When a containment event is real, the first thing that happens isn't panic. It's silence. The official channels go quiet while the people in charge decide how much of the truth they can afford to admit. And I'd already noticed, 20 minutes before Diane texted, that the municipal water pressure at my own kitchen tap had dropped. I'd run the faucet to fill that glass and felt the stream go thin and uncertain under my fingers, the way it does when somewhere upstream a valve has been thrown. Someone, somewhere in the county system I'd spent 2 decades maintaining, had started pulling reserves. The infrastructure was already reacting to something the public hadn't been told. The town was holding its breath, and it didn't even know it. So when my ex-wife told me she knew a code to a shelter my father helped build, I didn't dismiss it the way a sane man should have. My father, Walter Crane, had been a Cold War contractor in the 60s and 70s. He'd worked on civil defense projects all over western Pennsylvania, the kind of buried concrete the government built in a panic and then quietly forgot about as the decades passed and the threat changed shape. He used to talk about Mercer Ridge when he'd had too much to drink, which toward the end was most nights. A deep shelter, dug into the limestone, built to hold a few hundred people and seal itself off from the world for weeks. I'd always assumed it was an old man's exaggeration. The kind of story a fading man tells to make his small life feel large. A myth he'd built to keep himself company. But Diane had been there. That was the part my mind kept snagging on, like a sleeve caught on a nail. When we were married, before everything went sour and silent between us, my father liked her more than he ever liked me. That was just a fact of our family, sharp-edged and unspoken. He took her on a drive once, just the two of them, a Sunday in the fall 15 years ago, and came back oddly quiet. The way a man is quiet when he's just told someone a thing he's been carrying alone. She never told me where they went. I'd asked once, and she'd said, "Just driving." And the way she'd said it had made me let it drop. I'd forgotten about it entirely for 15 years. Now it was the single most important fact in my life. I called her. My finger left a smear on the screen. She picked up on the first ring, before the first ring had even finished. And her voice was the thing that converted my disbelief into motion. Because Diane is a controlled person. She's a nurse, a charge nurse at a regional trauma center. The kind of woman who stays calm and clear and quiet, while everyone around her is bleeding and screaming and losing their grip. In 20 years of knowing her, I had seen her cry exactly twice. And both times, she'd been furious about it, like her own tears were a piece of equipment that had malfunctioned. I had never once heard her sound afraid. And on that call, under the flat professional calm she put on like a coat, there was a thread of pure animal fear, wound so tight that hearing it made the hair stand up on my arms. "Russell," she said, "don't talk, just listen to me. I'm at the hospital. We started getting them around 11 this morning. Bite cases. People coming in agitated, confused, fevered with these wounds they couldn't explain. Then around 1, the bite cases stopped being patients and started being a problem. 2 hours ago, a man I had personally pronounced dead, no pulse, fixed pupils, the whole protocol, I called it myself, sat up on the gurney while a tech was zipping the bag. I'm not exaggerating, Russell, and I'm not having some kind of breakdown." I left. I walked out the service exit and got in my car. And the eastbound lanes of 22 are already a parking lot full of people who don't know yet what I know. I didn't say anything. There was a roaring in my ears that wasn't the phone. I think she heard the silence because she filled it. "Your father showed me Mercer Ridge in October of 2009, she said. "He drove me up there himself. He made me memorize the entry code standing at the door, made me say it back to him 5 times until I had it cold. He said someday somebody in this family would need it, and that you'd be too proud and too stubborn to believe him if he told you. So he was telling me instead. He said, 'Diane, you're the one with the spine in this marriage.' I thought he was a lonely old man telling stories to a daughter-in-law who'd listen. I'm sorry I never told you. I'm sorry about a lot of things, and we don't have time for any of them. The code is in my head, and Mercer Ridge is the only place within 100 miles that can be sealed from the inside. We have until dark, maybe a little after, before this reaches Cedar Hollow. After that, the roads belong to them." "Where do I meet you?" I said. It wasn't a question. There was no decision in it. There was nothing left to decide. "Our old house," she said. "I still own it, Russell. I never sold it. 40 minutes for you if the back roads hold. Bring water, bring tools, all your tools, the good ones, and bring anything that runs on a battery. And Russell." A pause, and I heard her breathe. "Bring your father's notebooks, if you still have them. We're going to need to know how that place works, not just how to get in. There's a difference between opening a door and surviving behind it." The line went dead. Not hung up, dead. The clean, total dead of a cell network that has simply ceased to exist. The silence behind the silence. I pulled the phone from my ear and looked at it. No bars, no carrier name. Just the time, 2:17, ticking forward into a world that had ended somewhere between the second and third ring. That was the moment the 6 hours started, and the moment I understood the central problem of everything that came after. I did not trust Diane. I had 1,000 small reasons not to trust her, accumulated over a marriage that had died slowly and a divorce that had been clean and merciless. And she was the only person alive who could get me underground before the world I knew finished collapsing. I moved through my house the way you do when your body knows things your mind hasn't caught up to yet. There's a kind of clarity that comes over you in those moments, narrow and bright, where the trivia of normal life simply falls away, and you can see exactly what matters. I'm not a hoarder, but a man who fixes machines for a living, keeps supplies, keeps redundancy, keeps the things that let you solve a problem at 3 in the morning when no store is open. I filled 2 5-gallon jugs from the tap before the pressure could drop any further. And I felt that pressure stutter even as I did it. The water coming in surges and hesitations instead of a steady flow. The system upstream, fighting something I couldn't see. I capped the jugs and hauled them out to the truck, one in each hand. Those who were saying darny right. The weight pulling at my shoulders. I grabbed my tool bag, the heavy canvas one I'd carried for 15 years. The one with the cordless drill and the spare battery and the pry bar and the multimeter and the channel locks worn smooth where my hand went. I took every loose battery in the house, raided the junk drawer and the flashlight in the hall closet and the smoke detectors, dumped them all in a freezer bag. The camping lantern, the hand crank emergency radio I'd bought after an ice storm 3 winters back and never used. A box of protein bars from the cabinet, going stale. A first aid kit that was mostly bandages and a bottle of ibuprofen 2 years expired. I worked fast, and I worked quiet. And the whole time, some animal part of me was listening to the street outside, waiting for the sound of things going wrong out there to catch up with the things I already knew. And then I went down into my basement, to the gun safe I'd inherited from my father, along with the notebooks and the silence and everything else I'd never wanted to think about. And I spun the dial and opened it. His old bolt-action hunting rifle was inside, oiled, the stock worn dark by his hands. A box of ammunition sat beside it, the cardboard soft with age. I took them both out and stood there for a second with the cold weight of the rifle across my palms. And I understood, fully for the first time, that I was preparing to possibly point this thing at something that had recently been a person. That I might have to. The understanding didn't feel like fear. It felt like a door closing somewhere behind me, sealing off the man I'd been that morning. The notebooks were where I'd left them 3 years before, in a plastic storage tote in the corner of the basement, labeled Dad, in my own block letters with a marker that had since dried out. I hadn't opened that tote since the week after the funeral, when I'd swept the contents of his desk into it, because I couldn't stand to look at them and couldn't bring myself to throw them away. 3 water-stained engineering notebooks, their covers warped, full of his cramped, angry little print. The handwriting of a man who pressed too hard on the pen. I'd never read a page of them, I couldn't after he died. I'd told myself I would someday, and known I never would. I grabbed all three and threw them in the truck bed without opening them, on top of the water jugs. By the time I pulled out of my driveway, it was 2:41. Through the windshield, Cedar Hollow looked exactly like itself. And that was the thing that nearly broke me. The Conroys, 2 doors down, were unloading groceries from the back of their minivan, the husband balancing a case of soda on his hip. A kid I half recognized was riding a bike in slow, looping circles in the cul-de-sac, standing on the pedals. Somebody's sprinkler was running. The afternoon light was gold and thick and absolutely ordinary. The kind of light that makes a small town look like a photograph of itself. And it made my chest hurt in a way I can still feel if I think about it. Because I had information now that none of them had. And there was no way to hand it to them across a lawn that wouldn't sound like the ravings of a man having a breakdown. I didn't stop. I've thought about that more than almost anything else from that day. I didn't stop to warn anyone. I didn't roll down my window and tell the Conroys to fill their bathtubs and lock their doors. I didn't tell the kid on the bike to go inside and find his parents. I told myself there was no time. And that was true as far as it went. But it wasn't the whole truth. And I've never let myself pretend otherwise. The whole truth is that I was already doing the math. The cold arithmetic that survival forces on you whether you consent to it or not. And the math said that every single person who learned about Mercer Ridge was one more body trying to fit through a door built for a finite number, and I didn't even know yet how finite that number was. Survival turns you into someone before you've had the chance to decide whether you want to be him. I drove past the Conroys with my eyes on the road, and I have to live with the shape of that for the rest of my life. The roads told the story as I drove, chapter by chapter, the further I got from my own street. Cedar Hollow's little main street was nearly normal. A few more cars than usual at the gas station, a woman standing in the middle of the pharmacy parking lot, staring at her dead phone the way I'd stared at mine. The county road heading out toward the old highway was busier than I'd ever seen it on a weekday afternoon. But it was still moving, still obeying the lines on the pavement. And then I crested the long hill above the on-ramp and saw Route 22 laid out below me in the valley. And my hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles ached. Diane hadn't exaggerated a single word. The eastbound lanes, the lanes heading toward Pittsburgh, toward the cities and whatever was happening in them, were stopped absolutely dead. A solid, motionless river of metal stretching out of sight in both directions, sun glinting off 1,000 stationary roofs. But it was the westbound side that told me how bad this truly was, because the westbound side, the side leaving the city, was packed solid too, and it was moving wrong. Cars were riding the shoulder in a ragged second lane. Cars were down in the grassy median, fishtailing through the mud. A pickup had its 2 right wheels up on the embankment and was just grinding along the edge at 20 miles an hour, and the thing that put ice in my spine was that nobody was honking at it. Nobody honks anymore when they understand that the rules are gone. Honking is what you do when you still believe the world is going to go back to normal and you want to register your complaint with it. There was no honking down there. There was just movement, frantic and silent, and breaking down by the minute. I took the back way. I know these hills better than any GPS ever will. 20 years of driving out to pump stations and reservoirs and lift stations at every hour of the night teaches you every farm lane and gravel cut and forgotten township road in a county. I dropped off the main grid entirely and threaded through the high country on roads with no center line. Roads that wound between cornfields gone brown and woodlots and old barns leaning into the wind. I passed a Mennonite family standing at the end of their long gravel driveway. A man and a woman and 3 children, all of them facing the distant highway with their hands raised to shade their eyes, perfectly still, watching the glittering dead river of traffic in the valley like they were watching weather come in. The man turned his head and watched my truck pass. I lifted 2 fingers off the wheel. He didn't wave back. He just watched. And I drove on. And I've wondered ever since whether they made it. Those quiet people who lived already half outside the world that was ending. It was on one of those back roads, about 25 minutes into the drive, that I saw the first one, and the abstraction became flesh. He was walking down the middle of the road toward me, into the long shadows the trees threw across the pavement. A man, I thought at first, in a torn dress shirt, the pale blue kind you'd wear to an office, the tail of it hanging out. He was moving with a strange, loose-jointed urgency, lurching, his weight thrown forward like he was perpetually about to fall and catching himself with each step, like every string in his body was being pulled by a different careless hand. I'd turned my headlights on without thinking about it, an old reflex on these shaded roads where the canopy made false dusk in the middle of the day. As the lights caught him, he turned his face toward me, square into the beams, and I saw that the lower half of it was wrong. Dark and wet, the jaw working, something missing about the shape of it in a way that a face should never be. He didn't flinch from the light the way a living man would. He turned toward it. I didn't slow down. God forgive me, I didn't even take my foot off the gas. I swung the truck wide onto the grass shoulder to go around him. Gravel spitting from under the tires, and he lunged faster than anything moving like that had any right to be. A sudden explosive correction of all that loose-jointed lurching. And his hand slapped flat against the side panel of my truck with a sound like a thrown stone, hard enough that I felt it through the frame. I had a half-second flash of his eyes in my side mirror, and there was nothing behind them. Nothing at all. Just appetite. Then he was a shape in the mirror, standing in the middle of the road where I'd left him, getting smaller, turning to follow the sound of my engine with that terrible patient hunger. I drove the rest of the way to our old house with my heart slamming against my ribs and a fine tremor in my hands that I couldn't stop. And a new and total certainty settled into the marrow of me. It was real. All of it. The man on the gurney, the bites, the dead river of traffic, the world I had woken up in that morning, with its coffee and its newspaper and its ordinary gold light, was already gone, already finished. And I was driving as fast as I dared toward my ex-wife because she held a 6-digit number in her head. And that number was the only thing standing between me and ending up like the man in the torn blue shirt. Our old house sits on a half-acre lot at the dead end of Birch Lane. A 2-story colonial with green shutters that we'd bought in 2003 when we still believed completely in the future. When Diane was 31 and I was 34. And we'd stood in the empty living room and talked about where the Christmas tree would go. I hadn't seen the place in 3 years. It looked smaller than I remembered, the way places do. Diane's car was in the driveway with the trunk standing open, and Diane was beside it in her hospital scrubs, the pale blue gone gray in the lowering light, and she had a tire iron in one hand, held down along her leg the way you hold a thing you've decided you might have to use. When she saw my truck turn into the drive, she didn't smile. She didn't do anything for a second. She just looked relieved. And the relief on her face was almost worse than fear would have been. Because Diane, being visibly relieved to see me, meant that some real part of her had genuinely believed I might not come. I pulled in behind her car and killed the engine and got out. And for a moment we just stood there, looking at each other across 10 feet of gravel. 2 people who had once promised each other forever in front of 100 witnesses, and then spent years learning, in slow and bitter installments, exactly what forever costs. "You look older," she said. "You look exactly the same," I said, and I meant it as more than reflex. She did. The same sharp, watchful face, the same gray-green eyes that never seemed to settle, the same way of standing balanced on the balls of her feet, like she was perpetually ready to catch something that was about to fall. 3 years had touched her hardly at all, or maybe being right about the end of the world agreed with her. "We need to talk while we load," she said, all business now, the relief folded away somewhere I couldn't see it. "And there are things I have to tell you that you're not going to like. Things about that place and the people who know it. But not here, and not slow. Help me with this first." This was a hard-sided case in the open trunk, gray plastic with steel latches. And when she flipped it open, I saw that it was full of medical supplies, real ones. Hospital grade, the kind they keep behind 2 locked doors and a sign-out sheet. IV bags in their sterile sleeves, suture kits, blister packs of antibiotics, glass ampules of things I couldn't read in the failing light. She'd stripped a supply room on her way out the door. "You stole all this," I said. It wasn't an accusation. I just heard myself say it. "I took it," she said, and looked at me levelly. "There's a difference. And in about 4 hours, nobody left alive on this planet is going to care about the difference. Now listen, because this part matters more than the boxes." She straightened up from the trunk and faced me full on. And the steadiness in her eyes had something underneath it that I didn't like. "Mercer Ridge isn't empty, Russell. There's a chance, a good chance, given what's happening, that we won't be the only ones who know how to get in. And the people who might know about it are not people I want to be sealed inside a concrete box with for 3 weeks. So we have to get there first. Do you understand what I'm telling you? It's not just the dead we're racing up that mountain. It's the living. The living might be worse." I didn't understand. Not yet, not the whole of it. But the gap I could hear between what Diane knew and what she was willing to say out loud became the second engine of dread running underneath that entire afternoon. A low vibration I couldn't locate, like a generator somewhere below the floor. We loaded both vehicles in 11 minutes. Diane is brutally efficient under pressure, a quality that used to leave me feeling slow and clumsy across the dinner table during our marriage, and that I was now grateful for, with my entire body. She directed, and I lifted. The water jugs went into my truck bed, lashed down with a ratchet strap so they wouldn't roll. The gray medical case rode in the cab, where it could be reached. Her own bags, 2 of them, packed tight, went in beside it. And that was the detail I noticed and filed away in the back of my mind. The way I file away the wrong sound a motor makes before it fails. Diane was too ready. Her 2 go bags were old. The canvas was faded along the seams, the buckles tarnished. The kind of wear that comes from a bag sitting packed and forgotten in the bottom of a closet for years, not from a frantic afternoon of throwing things together. People don't pack a bag like that for a Tuesday emergency that started at 11 a.m. People pack a bag like that when they have been quietly, privately afraid of something for a very long time and have made their peace with looking paranoid in exchange for being ready. My ex-wife had been waiting for this day. The thought sat cold in my chest while I cinched the strap. "How do you want to do this?" I said. "1 vehicle or 2? 2, she said without a half-second of hesitation, like she'd decided it hours ago. "If one breaks down or gets blocked or runs out of road, we don't lose everything in one stroke. You follow me. I know the turnoff, and you don't. It's not on any map. Your father made absolutely sure of that. He was prouder of that than of the shelter itself." She paused, and her hand came to rest on the open car door, and something crossed her face. "And Russell, if we get separated, if something happens to me on the way up, the code is 662904. Say it back to me. 662904. Again, slower. 662904. I felt it lodge in my memory like a splinter under the skin, the kind that won't work its way out. "Diane, why are you giving me the code right now? You're standing 6 feet away from me. We're driving up together." She looked at me for a long second, and something moved behind those gray-green eyes that I liked even less than the gap I'd heard in her voice earlier. "Because," she said quietly, "I might not be coming inside." She turned and got into her car and pulled the door shut before I could ask her what in God's name she meant by that. And the question sat in my throat like a swallowed stone for the entire drive up the mountain. We drove. Her taillights stayed ahead of me, 2 red points threading along roads that climbed and narrowed and emptied out the higher we went. The houses growing further apart and then disappearing altogether, the trees pressing closer to the shoulder until they made a tunnel overhead. The radio in my truck, scanning, finally caught one station still broadcasting, and it was a man's voice reading an emergency script over and over, the same 40 seconds looping back on itself with the dead patience of a recording. "Avoid the affected. Do not approach individuals exhibiting erratic or aggressive behavior. Shelter in place. Await further instructions. Shelter in place." As if there were a place. As if a split-level house in a subdivision, with its hollow core doors and its big front windows, could be sealed against the thing I'd watched lurch out of the shadows in a torn blue shirt. Await further instructions. There were no further instructions coming. The man reading the loop was probably already gone, the recording outliving him in an empty booth. The light was going amber and long as we climbed, the sun dropping toward the ridgeline, the shadows of the trees stretching all the way across the road and laying down on the far shoulder. It was a little after 4 now. We were maybe 10 miles from Cedar Hollow as the crow flies, but 1,000 feet higher, up in the kind of broken, wooded country where my father had spent his working life, burying the things the government paid him to hide and forget. Diane's brake lights flared red, and she turned off the paved road onto a logging track I would have driven past 100 times and never once seen. A heavy chain hung across the entrance between 2 steel posts, except it didn't hang exactly. It drooped, broken, the 2 cut ends lying in the weeds, and the cut faces of the links caught the low sun and shone bright and silver and fresh. Somebody had cut that chain, and recently, within hours, before the rust could touch the bare metal. We were not the first ones up this mountain today, and that single bright detail went into me like a needle slid under a fingernail. I saw Diane see it too. Her car stopped just inside the track. I pulled up alongside her and rolled down my window, and the cool mountain air came in smelling of pine and cut grass in the coming dark. "That chain was intact when I scouted this 2 days ago," she said quietly. And there it was again, laid bare the proof that she had been up here, planning, preparing, before any sane person on earth had any reason to be planning anything. It was padlocked and rusted solid. Somebody's ahead of us, Russell. Somebody got here first. How far in is the entrance? Half a mile, maybe a little more. The track ends at a maintenance shed that looks like a piece of junk, like nothing at all. The real door is behind it, set into the hillside. Her hands were wrapped around the top of her steering wheel, gripping it hard enough that the tendons stood up under the skin. "Russell, I need you to be ready for the possibility that we get up there and the door is already open. And if the door is already open, we do not go charging in blind. We do not call out our names. We don't announce ourselves to whatever's down there. We watch first. We listen. Promise me that much. Who do you think is up here, Diane? You've got a name in your head. I can see it on your face. And she told me, finally, the first real piece of the truth. And it landed in the cab of my truck, with the weight of a body dropping onto a table. Your father didn't build Mercer Ridge alone, she said. Nobody builds a thing like that alone. There was a crew of them, the contractors who knew what it really was. And at the end of the job, they made a pact among themselves. Each of them got the code, and each of them got the right to bring his own family down here if the day ever came that the world needed a hole this deep. Your father was one of 7. He told me all 7 names that day in 2009, standing right at that door, like he needed someone besides himself to be carrying them. And he told me that of the 7, there was one man he would have taken a bullet to keep out of this shelter. Because that man was the reason your father stopped sleeping through the night for the last 20 years of his life. His name was Earl Voss. And that cut chain, Russell Earl Voss drove a pickup with a hydraulic chain cutter welded to the front bumper. I've seen it. It's in one of your father's photographs, in a box I bet you've never opened. I sat with that, the engine idling under me, the cut chain glinting in the slanted gold light, the dark coming up out of the valleys below us like water filling a basin. What did Voss do? I said. What did he do that my father couldn't sleep over? Not now, Diane said. Up the mountain, with the door sealed behind us, if we ever get that far. We're losing the light, and we don't have a minute to spare for the past. But you asked me why I might not be coming inside. And Earl Voss is part of the answer. Now drive. Follow me close, and kill your headlights, when I kill mine. We drove the last half-mile in low gear, the truck crawling over a track so rough that the lashed-down water jugs strained against their strap, and the tools shifted and clanked in the bed. The trees pressed in close enough to scrape the mirrors, and then, all at once, they opened up, and we came out into a clearing at the top of the world. And there it was, the maintenance shed. A sad, forgettable little box of corrugated steel, maybe 20 feet on a side, rusted to the deep red-brown of dried blood, exactly as unremarkable as Diane had promised. The kind of structure your eye slides right off. And parked beside it, its engine still ticking and pinging as it cooled in the evening air, sat a black pickup truck with a heavy steel chain cutter welded to the front bumper, scarred and paint-chipped, the jaws of it still open. Earl Voss had beaten us to the mountain. We stopped our vehicles at the edge of the clearing and killed the engines, and the silence that rushed in to fill the space where the motors had been was enormous, almost physical, pressing on my ears. Just the wind moving through the high trees with a long sound like the sea, and the tick of 2 cooling engines, and somewhere far below us, faint as a half-remembered dream, the rise and fall of a siren that never seemed to either get louder or stop. Diane got out of her car without a sound, easing the door shut against the latch with her hip, and crouched at my open window. Behind the shed, she breathed, her voice barely more than shaped air. The door's set into the hillside. You'll see the concrete frame. I can't tell from here whether it's open. We go on foot, low, quiet, along the tree line. You have the rifle? I had the rifle. I'd loaded it before we left the house, working the bolt to chamber around with hands that hadn't felt like my own. I'd never pointed a gun at anything bigger than a deer in my life. And I'd only done that twice, both times at my father's insistence. And I'd hated it both times, the noise, the smell, the awful stillness afterward. Now I was about to carry it across a darkening clearing toward a buried Cold War shelter, behind the woman I used to be married to, because a man named Earl Voss had cut a chain and driven up here ahead of us. We moved along the tree line at the edge of the clearing, staying low, the dew already coming up cold through the grass and soaking the cuffs of my pants. The shed was bigger up close than it had looked from across the clearing, and its double doors hung open on rusted hinges, revealing nothing inside but empty steel shelving and the kind of forgotten junk that collects in any abandoned outbuilding, in a coil of rotted hose, a paint can, a wooden crate gone soft. But behind the shed, dug straight into the slope of the hill, was the thing I had half convinced myself my father had invented out of loneliness and whiskey. A blast door. Steel, painted the dull olive green of military equipment, every bit of 8 feet wide and just as tall, set into a poured concrete frame that the hillside had grown up and over in the 60 years since the pour, grass and roots and a young birch reclaiming the edges. There was a keypad recessed into the concrete beside it, the old mechanical kind, brass buttons under a small hinged steel cover, and the cover had been flipped up. And the door was open, not wide, cracked maybe a foot, a vertical sliver of pure blackness leaking out into the gold and fading evening. And out of that blackness came a steady draft of cold air, the breath of the mountain itself. Diane put her flat hand against my chest, stopping me, and we crouched together at the back corner of the shed, listening. From inside that foot-wide gap of darkness, faint, distorted by concrete and distance, came a sound, and it took me a moment to understand it. It was a man's voice, low and steady, and then another voice answering it, higher, sharper. 2 people at least, talking, not screaming, not fighting for their lives, talking. Whatever was happening down there in the dark, it wasn't a slaughter, it was something else. A negotiation, an argument, a conversation between people who knew each other. A family. Earl had a family, Diane whispered, reading the same evidence I was reading. A wife and a son. Last your father knew of it anyway. The son would be a grown man now, 40s maybe. So there's 3 of them down there, at least. At least. I looked at the cracked door, at the sliver of black, at the cold air pouring out of the mountain, at the rifle hanging awkward and heavy across my back, and I felt the whole impossible shape of the night close around me like the jaws on that chain cutter. We had maybe 4 hours, by Diane's reckoning, before the dead climbed even to these heights. The only sealed shelter within 100 miles was already occupied by a man my own father would have killed to keep out, and I still didn't know why. And the woman crouched beside me in the wet grass, the woman with the code in her head, had told me twice now that she might not be coming inside. If you'd been crouched at the corner of that shed with us, listening to strangers' voices leak up out of a hole in a mountain, would you have backed away quietly and taken your chances on the surface, in the dark, with the dead coming? Or would you have done what we did? Because what we did, after everything, was decide to go down. Diane made the call, the way she'd been making the calls all afternoon, and I followed it the way I'd been following her since 2:14. We don't go in shooting, she breathed against my ear. We don't go charging in at all, not yet. We get to the door and we listen, close, until we know who's down there and how many, and whether they're the kind of people who'll open their hand or close it. If Earl Voss is the man your father said he was, we may have to find another way. But there is no other way, Russell. That's the whole trap of it. There is no other shelter, not within reach, not tonight. So we either make this one work, or we take it. Take it, she said the words flatly, with no more weight than she'd give a blood pressure reading. And in that flatness, I understood that Diane had already traveled. Somewhere behind those steady eyes, all the way down a road I was only now setting my foot on. She had already imagined taking the shelter by force. She had already run the scenario, weighed it, and decided that if it came to that, she could. We crept from the shed to the door. Up close, the cold poured out of the gap in a steady, even current. A draft that had to be 40 degrees colder than the evening behind us. And it carried a smell up out of the dark concrete and machine oil and cold steel. And underneath all of that, fainter, older, the particular stale smell of a place that has been sealed and breathing its own recycled air for a long, long time. The voices were clearer now, close enough to make out words. The man, older, gravel ground into his throat. Not built for it, I keep telling you. The scrubbers haven't run since they tested the system, and that was before you were born. And the younger man, sharp and impatient. Then we run them. That's what they're for. That's the whole point of them. And then a third voice, a woman, thin and tired and frightened. Earl, come look at this gauge. The needle's climbing. Earl. So the gravel-throated man was Voss himself. And they were having, almost word for word, the exact conversation I would have been having, in their place. The conversation of people who have just gotten themselves inside a 60-year-old machine and are discovering, system by failing system, how much of it doesn't work anymore. That was the detail that decided me. More than any name from my father's past, more than anything Diane had said about pacts or bullets. Because I know machines, the way I keep telling you. And I know that a shelter like Mercer Ridge lives or dies on 3 systems, and 3 systems only: air, water, and power. And I had just heard an old man complain that the scrubbers hadn't run since the day they were tested. The air scrubbers. The CO2 removal system. The thing that strips the carbon dioxide out of the recycled air so the people sealed inside don't slowly suffocate in their own breath. If those scrubbers didn't work, then the shelter wasn't a refuge at all. It was a tomb with a very good door. And everyone inside it, friend or enemy, Voss or Crane, was already on a clock measured in days, maybe less, depending on how many bodies were breathing. And I had spent my entire working life maintaining exactly that kind of closed-loop system. Whatever else, I was Walter Crane's disappointing son, Diane's failed husband, a 51-year-old man with shaking hands and a dead man's rifle on his back. I was also, almost certainly, the only person within 50 miles of that mountain who could make that air breathable again. That changed all the math. I wasn't just one more mouth at the door, one more body asking to be let into a space someone else had reached first. I was something they needed. I was a tool with a heartbeat. I leaned close to Diane and told her this in 3 quick, whispered sentences. And I watched her face change in the dim light as the strategic shape of it landed on her. Watched the nurse's quick calculation run behind her eyes. Then we don't sneak, she breathed back. We knock. We offer the trade. You're the trade. She paused, and her hand found my forearm in the dark and gripped it. But Russell, hear me. If I tell you to run, you run. You don't argue. You don't turn around. You don't look back at me. Promise me that. One more time. I'm not promising you that. Russell, I'm not promising to leave you behind. It came out of me before I decided to let it. The truest thing I'd said to her in years. And I felt it land between us into the cold air. I did that already, Diane. Once. The legal way, with the lawyers and the burnt coffee and the signatures. And I've regretted it every single day for 3 years. And I'm not doing it again on the side of a mountain at the end of the world. I'll knock, I'll trade. I'll fix their air with my own 2 hands. But we go down together, or we don't go down at all. She looked at me for a long moment in the gray light, the draft from the mountain stirring her hair, and something in her face that had been clenched tight as a fist since the moment I'd pulled into the driveway loosened, just slightly, just at the edges. Then she nodded, once, sharp, and reached past me and pulled the great steel blast door open another foot on its silent, perfectly balanced, well-oiled hinges. And the three voices inside the mountain went instantly, completely silent. "Earl Voss," she called down into the dark, her voice steady and clear and pitched to carry. "My name is Diane Crane. I'm here with Walter Crane's son, Russell. Walter gave me the code himself in 2009. We are not infected, and we are not here for a fight. We've brought a man who can fix your air. Don't shoot us coming down the stairs." The silence that answered her stretched out so long that I could hear my own pulse beating in my ears. A soft, fast drum. Then the gravel voice came back, closer now, just inside the rim of the dark. And there was something in it I couldn't read at all. Something that might have been a laugh and might just as easily have been old grief. "Walter's boy," it said. Of course it's Walter's boy come knocking at the end of the world. Come down slow, Walter's boy. Hands out where my son can see them, both of them, the whole way down. And bring the woman. We'll talk about the air." I went first. Down a long flight of steel stairs into the cold and the dark, the rifle slung muzzle down behind my back where no nervous man could mistake it for a raised threat, my boots ringing on the metal treads, each step echoing up the concrete shaft behind me. Diane came down behind me with the medical case bumping against her leg. And behind us, above us, someone swung the great blast door shut, and the sliver of fading gold evening shrank to a line, then to nothing. And the lock engaged with a sound like a vault closing, and we were inside the mountain, sealed in, with the dark and the cold air and the strangers. The stairs went down farther than I'd braced for. 3 full flights, the temperature dropping a degree with every flight until the cold had a damp mineral edge to it. At the bottom, a long corridor opened up, lit by emergency lighting that somebody had managed to coax back to life the old kind, caged incandescent bulbs throwing yellow pools of light at long intervals down the concrete passage, the spaces between them full of shadow. The walls were poured concrete, faintly sweating, beads of moisture catching the yellow light. And the air had that thick, heavy, used quality I had already feared from the smell of it at the door. The quality of air that has been breathed too many times. Standing in the corridor in the yellow light were 3 people, and the man at the front of them was holding a pump shotgun, the barrel angled down at the floor, but his hands ready on it. Earl Voss was somewhere in his late 70s, but he was the kind of old man who had clearly been hard his entire life and had only grown harder as the years stripped everything soft away from him. Tall, even stooped, with big knuckled hands and a face like a limestone cliff that had weathered badly, all deep crags and shadows in the yellow light. Behind him stood a woman about his own age, small and gray and bone-tired, a cardigan pulled tight around her against the cold. And beside her, the younger man, mid-40s, broad through the shoulders and chest, with his father's hard cliff of a face, but none of the decades of weathering on it yet. The son was the one watching Diane and me come down the last steps like we were a problem he hadn't yet decided how to solve. "Walter Crane's boy," Earl Voss said again, his eyes going over me from boots to face. "You don't favor him much. Walter was a bigger man than you. Broader." "He was," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "He hated me. You know that, son?" "My ex-wife mentioned it on the drive up," I said. "She didn't tell me why." Earl's mouth twitched at one corner, something that, on a less ruined face, might have become a smile. No, he wouldn't have. Walter was good at keeping things buried. Best I ever knew. He let the shotgun's barrel drift a little further toward the floor, not all the way, but enough that I felt the room breathe out a fraction. You say you can fix the air. The scrubber bank's been dead since we sealed the door 2 hours back. We've got the door locked. We've got water coming up from the cistern. We've got dry food enough for a month down in the stores. But if we can't run those CO2 scrubbers, none of the rest of it means a thing. Because in about 6 days, this stops being the safest place in Pennsylvania and starts being the best stocked grave in it. His eyes, pale and old and sharp, fixed on me. So, you actually know that system? Or did your woman there just say the words she had to say to get my door open? I've maintained closed-loop air handling for 20 years, I said. And I let the certainty come into my voice. Because it was the one true currency I had down here. County water treatment plant. The anaerobic digesters, the aeration systems, the pump stations. Same principles, same physics, often the same vintage of equipment. Show me the scrubber bank in the power plant and give me 10 minutes and I'll tell you whether it's fixable. But I'll tell you right now, before I see a thing if it ran in the 60s and it's been sitting cold and damp ever since. Your problem is almost certainly either the blower motors or the chemical media in the scrubbers. And one of those I can fix with what's likely already down here. The other one, I can't fix at all. Something shifted in Earl Voss's weathered face. Not warmth, I don't think the man had warmth left in him, but recognition. The look one tradesman gives another. He glanced back over his shoulder at his son. Take him to the plant room, Caleb. Marie. The old woman lifted her head. Marie, take the woman and her medical case and get her settled in the bunk bay. Get her squared away. His pale eyes came back to me, and now there was something in them I genuinely couldn't name. Something old and heavy and complicated. Walter's boy fixes our air. You've both earned your bunks and your share of the stores. But you understand me clear on one thing. This place holds what it holds. We did the arithmetic on 6 before you knocked, and 6 is what it holds. We do not open that door again. Not for anybody. Not your neighbor, not a child, not the President of the United States. So whatever you left behind, up there on the surface, make your peace with it now, because it's gone. I thought of Cedar Hollow lying in the gold afternoon light, the Conroys and their case of soda, the kid standing on his bike pedals in the cul-de-sac, the sprinkler turning. I made no peace with any of it, standing there in the yellow light and the cold. But I nodded, because the man with the shotgun wanted a nod from me before he'd let me near his machines. And I followed his son Caleb down the long, sweating concrete corridor, deeper into the heart of my dead father's secret. The plant room was a good 200 feet down the main gallery, behind a heavy steel door set with a wheel lock like the hatch on a ship. Caleb spun the wheel. It turned hard, with a screech of dry metal, and hauled the door open. And we stepped through into a chamber that genuinely took my breath. And not from the foul thickness of the air this time. It was a cathedral of machinery. It was my father's life's work, the thing he'd talked about drunk and never once shown me sober. The thing I'd half believed was a lie. The ceiling vanished up into shadow. 2 enormous diesel generators squatted on poured concrete pads, gray and oil-streaked. A bank of batteries the size and shape of coffins lined one wall, terminals furred with old corrosion. A water system ran along the back, and somewhere in the dark, beyond it, I could hear the steady, hollow drip of the cistern. And along the far wall stood the scrubber bank's 6 tall cylindrical units, painted that same olive military green. Ductwork running off the tops of them like the pipes of a church organ, joining into a manifold that fed the blowers. One generator was running, throbbing, steady, throwing waves of heat into the cold room. That was the good news, and it was real good news. They had power. The fuel was burning clean. The genset my father's crew had installed 60 years ago was still turning over. But the scrubbers were silent, dead. Not a fan turning, not a hum in the whole bank. And the air in that room, even with a generator running and burning oxygen of its own, was thick enough that I felt my own breath quicken to make up for it, my body reaching for air that wasn't fully there. "How long's the genset been running?" I asked, raising my voice over the throb. 2 hours, since we got down and got it lit. And the scrubbers never came up with it? Never even tried? No. Caleb shook his head, his jaw tight. The panel says they've got power, says it's feeding them. The fans just don't turn. Not a one. I went to the scrubber bank with my tool bag in one hand and my work light in the other. And Caleb Voss followed and stood behind me with his arms folded across his chest, watching. And I did the thing I've done 10,000 times across 20 years in cold pump houses and stinking plant rooms in the middle of the night. I read the machine. I found the blower motors. 3 big squirrel cage units mounted at the base of the manifold, feeding the bank. I clicked on my work light and ran the beam over the first one. I laid my bare hand flat against its housing. I leaned in and smelled it, the way you learn to smell a motor. And I knew, before I'd even pulled the access cover off, exactly what I was going to find. Because I'd smelled that particular smell, rust and old grease and burnt insulation varnish in 100 forgotten places. "Your blowers are seized," I said. "The bearings. 60 years of sitting dead still in a damp room will do it every time. The motors are getting their power fine. That's what your panel's telling you. That's why it thinks everything's healthy, but the shafts won't turn. Frozen solid. Hold the light steady on this." I worked the access cover off the first unit, and there it was in the beam, exactly as I'd known it would be. The rotor frozen in place, a skin of orange rust welding it to the housing where condensation had pooled and dried for 6 decades. "This one's gone hard. Let me check the others." 2 of the 3 blowers were seized absolutely solid, immovable. The third turned when I forced the shaft by hand, but it turned with a dry grinding shriek that told me its bearings were nearly finished too. Only months of running left in them, even on a good day. And here is where my whole unglamorous life, and every cold 3 a.m. call-out, every filthy pump I'd ever rebuilt on a concrete floor decided whether 6 people in a hole in a mountain were going to keep breathing. Because the answer wasn't despair. The answer was that I had rebuilt seized blower motors in worse conditions than this, with less light and fewer parts and colder hands. "I can fix this," I told Caleb, and I watched the hard cliff of his face crack open just for a second, with a relief he was far too proud to put into words. Not all 3, 1 for certain. Maybe 2, if my father's crew left spare bearings down here, which a man like my father always did. Every job, no exceptions. He'd have buried spares somewhere in this room. 1 blower won't run all 6 scrubbers at full capacity, but 1 blower will pull enough air through enough of the bank to keep 6 people breathing. It buys us time. Days, weeks, not hours. How long to fix it? 3 hours. If the right parts are already down here and I don't have to fight the rust too hard. All night, if I have to fabricate or improvise. I looked at him steadily. And I can't do it alone, not in 3 hours. I'll need a hand, and good hands, not just somebody to hold the light. You any good with tools? I'm a diesel mechanic, Caleb said. Heavy trucks, 20 years. And for the first time since we'd come down those stairs, something passed between us that wasn't suspicion and wasn't fear. Just two men who fixed broken machines for a living, standing in a cold, buried room, with every life in the place hanging on a single bearing the size of a donut. We found the spares. My father, 3 years dead, reached up out of his grave and handed them to us. Because in a gray steel cabinet bolted to the back wall of the plant room, its door labeled in his cramped, angry, pressing too hard handwriting, were the spare bearings, the gaskets, the drive belts, the sealed tins of lubricant, and all of it wrapped in waxed paper, all of it sealed against exactly this kind of damp. All of it in precisely the sizes I needed. I stood in front of that open cabinet with the work light in my hand and read my father's handwriting on the shelf labels, and I felt something rise up in my chest that I had not let myself feel at his funeral, that I'd kept buried for 3 years in a tote in my basement. And I had to turn my face away from Caleb Voss so he wouldn't see what was on it. We worked. For the next 3 hours, Caleb Voss and I tore down 2 of the 3 seized blowers in the throbbing heat of that plant room, the sweat running into my eyes despite the cold, our hands black with old grease and orange with rust. We pulled the frozen rotors with a bearing puller from my bag, heated the housings, drove the dead bearings out, and pressed the new ones home, cleaned 60 years of gummed grease off the shafts. And somewhere in the second hour, when we'd fallen into the easy, wordless rhythm 2 competent men find when they work on a thing together, when the air in the room was getting genuinely dangerous and we'd both started taking deliberate, slow breaths, Caleb started talking. And the second piece of the truth came up out of him like something he'd been carrying too long. You don't know what your old man and mine did up here, do you? He said, not looking at me, working a bearing race loose with steady pressure. Diane said she'd explain it to you on the way up. She didn't, did she? No, she said up the mountain. We never got there. He was quiet for a moment, and the only sound was the throb of the generator and the rasp of the puller and the drip of the cistern in the dark. They didn't just build this place, he said finally. I mean, they did. That was the job. That was the contract. Civil defense, a deep shelter for the county officials and their families. The whole Cold War arrangement, government money and government secrecy. But the money ran short the way it always does. And the schedule ran long the way it always does. And there were men working down in this hole in 1967 who weren't on any payroll anywhere. Men nobody was going to come looking for. You understand what I'm telling you? I didn't. And then all at once I did. And my hands went still on the wrench in the heat and the dark. Prison labor, Caleb said low. Convict crews leased out quiet. And then worse than that, men they brought in at night and never took back out. There was a collapse, a bad pour. The limestone shifted, I don't have all of it. My father only told me the once, drunk, when I was 20. And he made me swear on my mother's life I'd never repeat it. And I never have, not once, until right now, 200 feet under a mountain at the end of the world. He looked up at me then, and his hard face was something else in the yellow light. They poured the new foundation over them, Walter's boy. There are men in the walls of this shelter, in the floor under our boots. Your father knew. Mine knew. All 7 of them knew. And they took the money, and they kept the door, and they kept their mouths shut for 60 years. That's the secret the 7 of them all carried to their graves. The thing that bound them, and the thing that rotted them. And that's why your father hated mine. Because my father, Earl, was the foreman. My father gave the order to pour. And your father was the young man on the crew who dug and who shoveled and who never said one word, not then and not ever. He spent 50 years hating my father for giving the order and hating himself worse for obeying it. The generator throbbed. The dead, thick air pressed in on the both of us. And the shelter that my father had helped build. The shelter I'd driven through hell to reach. The shelter I was at that very moment rebuilding with my own hands out of my father's leftover parts to save 6 living people. That shelter turned out to be standing on the bones of men who had been buried alive in the making of it. If you're listening to this somewhere right now, and I'd honestly like to know where you are, where you're hearing this, leave it in a comment. It helps me picture who I'm talking to in the dark. Ask yourself what you'd do with a truth like that. Dropped on you 200 feet underground, with the only breathable air left in the world coming through a machine you're holding together with a dead man's spare bearings. I'll tell you exactly what I did. I kept working. Because the dead in the walls had been dead for 60 years, beyond any help or any harm I could do them. And the dead on the surface were getting closer with every hour that bled past. And the 6 living people breathing the failing air around me needed that blower to turn. That's the thing nobody warns you about a moral horror. The thing the movies always get wrong. It doesn't excuse you from the work in front of you. The carbon dioxide doesn't care what your father did or didn't do in 1967. It just keeps climbing, patient and indifferent, 1 part per million at a time. While you decide whether your conscience is going to let you save the people you can still reach. We got the first blower running at 9 minutes past 9 that night. I have no idea how I know the time, and so exactly except that I'd been checking my watch obsessively, watching the hours of our 6-hour window bleed away. I closed the access cover and torqued the bolts. Caleb stepped to the panel and threw the breaker. And the squirrel cage motor spun up with a clean, rising, beautiful hum. No shriek, no grind. Just the sound of a machine doing the one thing it was built to do. And the whole duct manifold shuddered and rang as the air began to move through it. And air, real moving air, pulled and scrubbed and pushed back out, began to flow out of the vents into the room. I stepped in front of the nearest vent and felt it move across my sweat-damp face, cold and clean. And I turned to watch the CO2 readout on the old analog panel. The needle that had been creeping steadily toward the red all night long. It hesitated. It hung there, trembling. And then, slowly, grudgingly, it began to fall back toward the green. Caleb Voss put his big grease-black hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. And I think neither of us could have managed words just then anyway. We had just bought 6 human beings their lives, the 2 of us, with our hands and a dead man's foresight. And we both knew it down to the bone. And for one clean, suspended moment in that filthy room, the bones in the walls and the dead climbing the mountain, and the woman with the code, and the man with the shotgun, and all of it fell away to nothing. And there was just the air, moving, and the needle, falling. That clean moment lasted maybe 90 seconds. Then Diane came through the hatch with a look on her face that turned the blood in my veins to cold water. And she said the words that ended the first part of that night, and began the much worse part. "Russell," she said, "Marie's been bitten." The plant room hatch clanged shut behind her, the wheels spinning as the latch caught. "When?" I said. The single word came out of me flat and hard. "She won't say. Her arm, her left forearm. She's kept that cardigan on and buttoned since the moment we came down. And I thought she was just cold. Everyone's cold down here. I was setting up the bunk bay, getting the medical case organized, and she reached up to take a blanket off a high shelf and the sleeve rode back. Diane's voice was the flat, clipped, professional calm of a woman holding herself together by main force. The voice she must have used 1,000 times to give terrible news across a hospital bed. It's a human bite, Russell. 2 to 3 hours old by the color of the bruising around it, the way it's set. And it's already showing the radial discoloration, these dark lines tracking up under the skin away from the wound, following the veins. I saw it in 11 patients today before I walked out of that hospital. She's turning. Slowly, more slowly than the ones in the city. Maybe because of her age. Maybe because the bite's on the arm, and far from the heart and the head. But she's turning. And Earl knows. Earl has known since they got down here. That's what they were arguing about when we crouched at the door. That's the conversation we heard. He brought his bitten wife into a sealed shelter, locked the only door behind her, and didn't say one word to anyone. Caleb Voss made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. It came from somewhere low in his chest, a single raw note, like something structural tearing loose. He pushed past both of us, spun the hatch wheel, and was through it and running down the long concrete corridor toward the bunk bay before I'd fully registered that he'd moved. Diane and I went after him, our boots hammering the concrete. And what we ran headlong into in that long, yellow-lit gallery was the true and final shape of the trap my father's 6-digit code had delivered us all into. Earl Voss was standing in the corridor outside the bunk bay door, and he had the shotgun up, and he was pointing it down the passage at his own running son. "Don't," Earl said. His voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of a man holding a great weight perfectly level because he knows that if he lets it tip even slightly, it will crush him. "Caleb, don't you go in there. Stop where you are." "That's Mom!" Caleb's voice cracked down the middle of the word. He'd skidded to a halt 10 feet from the muzzle. "That's my mother in there. You put that down. That was your mother." And there the old man's voice finally broke on the word your. Broke clean in half and then reformed itself, harder than before, hammered back into shape by 60 years of practice at burying things. "I saw it happen, son. In the hospital parking ramp. When we went to pull her out before the roads closed. A man came at us out from between the cars, out of nowhere, and he had her arm in his teeth before I could get the door open. I got him off her. I got her in the truck. I drove. And the whole way up this mountain I told myself it was shallow. I told myself it didn't catch deep. I told myself that down here, sealed in, safe, with rest and clean water, it would heal over. I told myself a great many things on the drive up, Caleb. A man can tell himself near anything when the only other thing to do is admit his wife is already gone. The shotgun did not waver. His old arms held it perfectly level. She's tied to the bunk in there now. I did it myself with the cargo straps while she was sleeping an hour ago. And she is not your mother anymore. And in another hour, maybe less, she is going to be the exact thing we drove up this mountain to get away from. Except she's going to be down here, inside, behind a door we cannot open. The corridor went dead silent, except for one sound. The new, beautiful, indifferent sound of the blower running. Pushing clean, scrubbed air past all of us, past the old man and his shotgun, and his weeping son and his dying wife. Keeping us all alive so that we could stand here and watch this happen. And in that silence, I understood, finally and completely, the full nature of the situation that my father's code had carried me down into. We had won the war for the air. I had fixed the machine with my own 2 hands. The needle had fallen back into the green. And none of it mattered. because the enemy was already inside the walls with us, strapped to a bunk 40 feet down the corridor. And the man who had carried that enemy in through the only door was standing here with a shotgun between his grieving son and his transforming wife. And there was no surface left to retreat to. The roads belonged to the dead now. It was full dark up top. We were sealed in, the 6 of us, except that one of the 6 was in the last minutes of being a person at all. And the cold arithmetic Earl Voss had recited to me at the door, the arithmetic on 6, had been a lie the whole time, even as the words left his mouth. The shelter didn't hold 6. It held 5 and a countdown. Diane was the one who moved. Of course it was Diane. She is a nurse to the center of her bones, and a nurse runs toward the body, toward the crisis, while everyone else freezes. She stepped forward, putting herself between Earl Voss's shotgun and Caleb's grief, her empty hands raised and open at her sides, palms out. And she did the thing she had spent 20 years of trauma shifts learning how to do. She took command of a room full of terrified people by sheer force of calm. "Earl, look at me. Lower the gun. You're not going to shoot your son, and you know it, so put it down before someone gets hurt by accident. Caleb, stop pushing toward that door. Everyone is going to stand exactly where they are and listen to me, because I'm the only person in this mountain who has watched this thing happen more than once today. And I know things about it that all of you need to know right now." She didn't pause to find out whether it was working. She just kept talking, low and even and relentless, the way you talk a man down off a ledge, one steady word laid in front of the next. "Marie is not going to heal. I'm sorry, Earl, but you need to hear it plainly, because everything we do in the next few minutes depends on you hearing it. There is no down here where this gets better. There is no rest and clean water that turns it around. I have watched the timeline in front of my own eyes today, in patient after patient, and from bite to turn, it's been running about 4 to 6 hours, depending on where the bite is, and how old and how strong the person is. Her arm, her age, that put her at the long end of it. That bought you the drive up the mountain. But Earl, you said you tied her up an hour ago, while she slept. And people don't sleep through this, not at the end. They go still, and then they go fevered, and then they sleep. And the sleep is the last quiet part, before the turn. Which means we don't have an hour. We have minutes. And when she turns, those cargo straps will not hold her. I have seen what they can do. The strength of it doesn't make sense. It will tear free, and then it will be loose in this corridor with the 6 of us. And there is exactly one door out, and it opens onto a mountain full of the dead.